That's my big problem. I forget the recording a lot. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tim Stommer, and this is Ruthie Dixon. Wave, Ruthie. There we go. We're both with the conference committee, and we are happy to welcome you here to our evening session. And I'd like to introduce Kristen Barr, who is from, let's see, Williamsburg, James City Schools. Did I get that right?
Yep, James City County. Yep.
James City County Schools. Okay. And she's going to be talking about hybrid learning and how to integrate the Office 360 tools into your classroom. So take it away.
All right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. I know the evening is a difficult time sometimes between dinner and kids and bedtimes, and just after a long day, sometimes you're done with Zoom. So I appreciate you guys joining. We are going to do this with a Nearpod, and there are a couple of times when I'll ask for some interaction and feedback. So if you have multiple screens or a phone, or it's a live presentation, so if you go to the Nearpod, you'll still see what I'm showing on the Zoom. So however you are most comfortable doing it, if you would join, it's at join.nearpod.com. Or in the app if you have it, and that's the 5-letter code there. So I'll introduce myself a little bit. My name is Kristen Barr. I'm the coordinator of instructional technology and personalized learning for Williamsburg, James City County Schools. I also teach biology in our virtual learning program, and I'm a Microsoft Innovative Educator Expert, which is a program, a worldwide program of teachers who form a professional learning network and share in professional learning and best practices and other things related to using Microsoft tools in the classroom. So a number of the pieces of information I'll share tonight comes from work with that group. So, so there's that. So I'm going to go ahead and start just for consideration of time. And as people join in the chat, maybe we can tell them that we're in Nearpod, and the code is always in the upper left there. So they'll be able to join in our presentation. So that's me, picture of me and my family. And if you want to connect on Twitter, there's my Twitter handle. And then of course the Microsoft Education Twitter handle. They provide a lot of updates on Office 365 products. I'm assuming people who are here are from Microsoft districts. So hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about tools that you use and maybe that your teachers use that we can use in maybe a different way with hybrid learning. So our agenda for today is to talk about what really I think for a while has been talked about as the future of learning, a hybrid learning environment. And we'll talk about overviews of a variety of different types of remote and learning hybrid learning models. Although a lot of us have been forced to do this this year, right? Like we've really been forced to pivot in a direction that I think we were taking small steps towards, but we're definitely shoved that way this year. So we will look at a couple of models, some 5 elements of learning environments that should be considered when we talk about hybrid learning, and then best practices for implementing those 5 elements and Microsoft Office 365 products. So to start out, I want to hear a little bit from you and just break the ice a little bit and then allow maybe some people to join us. But I want to know, how would you describe hybrid learning to a parent or to families? Do you discuss different learning environments with your students and families? And if you do, what kind of language do you use when you're talking with them? So we'll just take about a minute or two. In the Nearpod, there's a text box for you to post some of your thoughts here and share with us. So we'll just pause for a couple minutes and get some input. So if people have joined us since we started talking, we are on Nearpod, join.nearpod.com. And the code to join this session is there in the upper left. Go ahead and add your posts here. Queen Bee, I had a class that called me Queen Bee one year. They said, "Can we call you Queen Bee, Mrs. Barr?" I said, "Absolutely." I love it. All right, keep posting your thoughts, but I'm seeing some consistent ideas here. Sometimes we learn online, sometimes in person, a blend of in-person and virtual instruction. Some students will learn online while at the same time other students will be in person. A combination of personal and virtual takes a lot of hard work and patience. I think we've all learned that this year. It's difficult because there's lots of different interpretations. So we'll start with a little bit of that today. But for the most part, I see a lot of people having, it's this blend of in-person and virtual learning. Using Schoology, which I tell them is the organization meeting place for the assignments and where you post. Simple language, some of our class will be in the room while others are at home. Sometimes at the same time, sometimes at our own pace. So instead of location, now Leslie's bringing up some of the timing. Very nice. So I am pleasantly surprised that no one uses the terms synchronous and asynchronous when talking about how you would talk to your families. I see that those vocabulary words shared in a lot of different contexts, and I just think people don't know what you're talking about. Teachers do now, but even in the spring, when we first started with this pandemic and the remote learning and transitions, teachers had no idea what people were saying to them when we said synchronous and asynchronous and all of these different, educational vocabulary words. And I think it's important that if we want people to understand what we're doing, we use vocabulary they can understand. So I love that simple language and that none of you guys use those vocabulary words. We all, I think, would probably know what they mean, but our parents probably wouldn't. So when we're talking about remote and hybrid learning models, what we'll talk about here and what we're kind of thinking of here is partial opening. So some schools are opening for certain populations of students, usually a small minority of students, whether they be students with disabilities, English language learners, those who have connectivity issues. Like there are different divisions doing different pockets of just partial opening of your buildings, when I would say usually the majority of students are continuing remote learning or online virtual learning. And then we have the synchronous and separated. What I think of here is what a lot of you guys, I think, were talking about in that last slide, where you have some face-to-face and some online students receiving instruction at the same time. And then rotational is what we've started to do here. We kind of in Williamsburg have a blend of the synchronous and separated and rotational, but rotational, as I refer to it here, is when you are splitting up the week and you have a portion of your students attending, say, Monday and Tuesday, and the other portion attending Thursday and Friday, and then you flip-flop what they're doing on those other days. So a couple of different ideas and models for hybrid, but the common thread there is that there is some sort of integration of in-person instruction and virtual instruction. And of course, here we're going to use some of those vocabulary words. There's asynchronous and synchronous. So sometimes your lessons are going to be live with everyone working at the same time. Sometimes they're going to be independent at your own pace. And then again, the face-to-face and virtual. And all of these really require a bit of a shift to a student-centered learning pedagogy as opposed to an instructor-centered, because the instructor can only do so much at one time. And when you're trying to manage students in front of you and on your computer and all of these different ways of doing things, it can get to be overwhelming. So hopefully some of what we talk about here with some of the tools you could use, which are functional in person and virtually, will help the instructor manage some of those things, but really shifting to a personalized, real world, authentic, and engaging type of learning environment. So we have some information here from Michael Fullen about really taking the best of both worlds, bringing them together in a way that's intentional, that's planned, and that's really sound in pedagogy. So hybrid learning is really not a quick fix. It has been, it seems, for the last 6 months, but it's an idea that isn't a quick fix for educational institutions. Instead, it's a student-centered approach that combines the best of both worlds. Is this new? Absolutely not. This is blended learning. This is what we've been talking about, kind of wrapped up in a different package because of the circumstances. So it's applied a little bit differently, but a lot of the blended learning type pedagogies and ideas are applicable here with hybrid learning. So as we dig into how to set this up and create this, again, maybe a little bit late because a lot of us are doing this and we have been doing this for a few months, but there are 5 different elements that we're going to consider here today. The learning environment, so optimizing your physical and virtual learning space for yourself as the instructor and for the learning of your students. The class community, still really important, perhaps more important with all of the issues and other things that are going on now in addition to learning. Lesson design, still, of course, a vital element of any learning environment, including hybrid learning environments. Engagement and interactivity, so creating both those synchronous and asynchronous experiences that use a variety of strategies to ensure that students are engaged and active participants. I think a lot of people have experience with the research on active versus passive learning, students doing rather than receiving, and that still is important in a hybrid learning environment for both the cohort that's in front of you in person and the ones that are remote and at home. And then finally, of course, there's assessment and feedback that needs to be considered. So looking at this bimodal learning environment where we have 2 different situations at the same time, I love these pictures because you can see that the students in front of you can still have devices and they can still connect and should still connect with those students who are remote. So we need to imagine learning spaces that are dynamic, that include interactions between the instructor and all students. We need to consider accessibility tools for students who might need additional resources, whether they have a learning disability or not. How are we going to facilitate the use of those accessibility tools for students who we may not be able to stand with them and show them in an in-person environment? How are we going to facilitate one-on-one assistance or small group work? So thinking about the things that I think we're comfortable with in the physical environment in a traditional classroom and trying to transfer that to the virtual environment and really optimize both of those environments so that everyone is doing things efficiently. I think we need to think about what aspects transfer and how can we do it and what ones don't. There's no rule that says we have to recreate everything that we did in our traditional classroom for years and years and years to the remote environment or to the hybrid environment. So what can we figure out a way to adapt and what should be reimagined and how can we do that? So we're going to talk about some of those things today with a focus on tools from Microsoft Office 365, which oftentimes do have a counterpart in, say, Google or Zoom or other platforms. So the examples here will be the Microsoft tools, but You may be able to imagine others that you have access to within your division and available to you within your classroom. So if we think about our in-person interactions of creating learning centers, organizing materials and resources, the very basic setup of our classroom, I think that needs to be the first thing that we think about in our hybrid classroom. So Microsoft has a number of tools that are great for doing this. If you use Microsoft Teams, it's a whole virtual classroom that has a bunch of different channels and tabs and ways for you to organize and set up your flow of your classroom. Just like the beginning of the year when you set up your procedures in a traditional classroom, depending on your level, like elementary students, you talk about how to line up and where to put your jacket and your backpack. And in secondary, find where your lockers are and your bell schedule. You still need to do that in the hybrid environment for your class to run efficiently. So setting up your teams in a way that is ready to go from the beginning, that you can orient your students to, and taking that time is really important. OneNote notebooks on their own are really great for this as well. You can set up a OneNote notebook to have different tabs or sections with pages. You can have your collaboration space for collaboration and communication within students. You can have your own resource center that's read-only for the students. So those two tools are really great for organizing materials and resources. And then sometimes you're going to have to distribute handouts and resources and assignments to your students. Again, Teams is a great place to do this. OneNote has the ability to do that, where as the instructor, you can use the class notebook feature and push things out to your students. And then you can also just share OneDrive folders. So most of us already have some sort of organizational system, and OneDrive is a link, and you can share within your organization, giving certain permissions to certain users so that they have access to materials, notes, presentations, things like that. And then finally, one thing that I think has been difficult for a lot of teachers in the virtual environment is evaluating student participation. How do we know what students are doing when they're at home? And if, again, you're using Teams, there's an Insights tab that you can add to class Teams where you can review real-time data of what the students are doing within your team, who they're talking to, how often they're talking to them, how often they're participating in the various meetings and class sessions that you have there, and how often they're completing assignments. In your classroom, you can see that every day. You can see who has their hands up, who's on task, who's doing what. It's a little bit more difficult in the virtual classroom. So that Teams Insight tab, I think, is hugely valuable if you're using Microsoft Teams in your classroom. And I really recommend starting with one or two things, one or two locations for files or procedures for your students, and then building from there. Don't overwhelm them. I tried to stress this with teachers at the beginning of this year so often, and so many of them saw things on Pinterest and Facebook and everywhere, and they wanted to make everything look fancy with all the bells and whistles. And you know what? They were confused, their students were confused, and it just didn't work. Start with one or two things that work for you in your classroom. Teach those procedures to your students and then go from there. Again, it's nothing new. It's what we do in our traditional classrooms, I think, every year or at the start of every term. So a reminder about those things and maybe ways to use some of these tools. So we're going to pause again for a minute or two, and here we'll just use the chat. But think about ways to optimize the bi-modal learning environment. What are you doing for audio and video interactions? Or what is your district providing to you for audio and video interactions? And how does that dictate how you set up your classroom, how you plan for your classroom? What policies and procedures do you put into place? Again, accessibility resources are hugely important. And then what protocols will you establish for the efficient workflow to help students? Know where to find materials, how to turn in assignments, do those basic things that maybe need to be reimagined. So let's share some ideas. Again, I know that we've done this a little bit, but we'll start over again, perhaps in the semester or next year. And what things would you think, looking back now, we should change this or we should do this? So feel free to go in the chat. If you really want to, we can raise our hands and come off mute for a little bit. Feeling crazy? Who had wine at dinner? All right, so thinking about what systems do they allow for interactions between students, or does the teacher moderate everything? Establish norms and revisit often. Absolutely. That's an excellent recommendation. Google Classroom. Slow down, keep it simple. I thought you were telling me to slow down, Scott. I can talk fast, but I'm trying to get this in a half an hour. All the assignments are there. Same would be true for Microsoft Teams. So yep, it's fairly easy. Find missing assignments. Oh, I'm glad your in-person students love talking to your virtual students and that you moderate it. Yeah, you have to moderate it and keep track of what people are doing. Schoology in Loudoun County, along with additional tools. Start with what you know. Absolutely. One or two things, what you know, what you're comfortable with. Breakout rooms, pairing the roomers with the Zoomers. Love it. Schoology and Google. Choose the tools that you need. Yeah, don't put something in there because it looks cool or because the person down the hall is using it. Crawl, then walk, then run. Google Meet with breakout rooms. And actually, Microsoft announced today, it was all over Twitter, that their breakout rooms functionality is coming this week. It's being rolled out. So if you are Microsoft and you're using Teams for your video sessions, you'll get breakout rooms sometime this week, or so they say. So that's exciting, I think, for Microsoft users. Try not to use too many websites and programs. They are getting a lot of different things from them. So, and have a good mic, absolutely. And I think a good speaker. So if you have students at home who are trying to talk to your students in your classroom too, they need to be able to be heard. So not only, getting your voice out there, but receiving those that are remote as well, especially when you're in a classroom with maybe 10 students who are there. But yeah, going back to having how many things students and parents who are really facilitating this are getting thrown at them, it is a lot. And you think, oh, well, I'm only using one or two, but so is every single one of their teachers. So for some parents who have 3 kids, each of them are taking 8 classes, and they all, it gets to be a lot and it can be overwhelming. So absolutely, very, very good. Thank you guys for chiming in there. I don't feel like I'm talking to myself. Fabulous. All right, class community. Again, this is hugely important, and we know how important it is and how much easier it is in person, right? You can see your student. You can see when they're having a bad day. You can see when they walk in, shoulder slumped. You can't see that on Zoom necessarily, or in your Microsoft Team or your Google Classroom. So once you've kind of set up your procedures, you need to explore how you can continue to build community with your students who don't see each other every day or every other day or even ever. So how are they going to feel like they still know one another? Like they feel safe asking questions? That's something that needs to be considered, that needs to be set up, and that needs to be thoughtful and intentional. I think that it's easy for teachers, especially when you get to secondary school, that say kids talk all the time. Kids are always on their phones. They're texting, they're doing this and that, but you need to actually model and teach them how to communicate effectively and appropriately for the school environment, how to collaborate appropriately, and how to be successful in this environment working with one another. I think, and from what I've seen, a lot of teachers right now are doing a lot of independent work, and they're very hesitant to assign group projects or to assign partner work. And again, we're starting slow and we're crawling and then walking, then running. But how do we get to that place where we feel comfortable saying, okay, you 3 go in that breakout room and I'll come in and out between all the breakout rooms, but you can be that. I trust you. I trust that you're going to be on task. I trust that things are going to go well. So helping with digital citizenship and those sorts of things is really important still in your class community. I'm way behind time, guys. Sorry, I'm gonna go fast.
I was just going to jump in and give you your 5-minute warning, but take 7 or 8.
Okay, I'll do my best. Okay, so here again, the Teams has a post tab. It looks very much like Facebook or other social media where, again, the teacher can moderate it. They can mute students when you don't want them to be talking, but they can have day-to-day, more informal interactions and conversations and really get to know each other. And the teacher can pose questions that are not content related. They can say things like, what holidays are you celebrating right now? What are you preparing for? And maybe get some interaction going there between the different people in their classroom. Just what did you do this weekend? Those things that you would say in the first 5 minutes of class as people are coming in are still important and they can still be done. It's just a matter of where and how and with what parameters. So the Teams post tab is great for that. And actually you can add, if you have Microsoft Teams, your admin has to install this, but it's called the Reflect extension. And that's really hard to see on my screen. So hopefully yours looks better. But it's just a gauge of how are you feeling this week or today? And it's anonymous. So you can see how many people post those different colors between green to red, but it doesn't say, Johnny is red today. But it gives the teacher that information so that I can follow up later. But it helps the students to realize too, some people are struggling. So how can we interact with one another? So this I think is a great little temperature check for that. So as another think about it, I think that we will probably skip this one unless someone very, very quickly has something that's worked really well to foster connection with your students, to encourage socialization and student-to-student interaction. And then also that social emotional component that is so important right now because of all the things, not even just school, so many students are dealing with so many things in their families. So we still run clubs virtually. That's awesome. That's awesome that there's still clubs. That's hugely important to allow students to pursue their interests and their passions. If anybody wants to type feverishly as we go to share this, but I'm going to kind of keep rolling here. Next is lesson design. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because lesson design is lesson design, but we do need to remember, again, we kind of mentioned this at the beginning, less is more. And think about backwards design. What do your students need to know at the end of the day or at the end of the year? Focus on that. Streamline the focus of your course. This is not the time for all of the extras and all the kind of interest teaching. It's looking at your standards and saying, what do we need to focus on? And then really considering universal design for learning. This is a great opportunity to develop materials that while it will take time now, you can use for years to come. But think about universal design for learning and meeting the learning needs and experiences of all of your students. So think about multiple means of representation, the action and expression of the items that are in your course, the engagement with students within your course. It is hard. It takes time. I know. But the nice thing about the virtual and digital classroom is that you do have it then for years and years to come, small tweaks, and it's good to go for the next year. So important considerations for lesson design. Here again with lessons, I think that we all know the conference video call for lectures, demonstrations, collaborations, in-class live daily meetings, on Teams calls and Zoom, and I'm sure the Google Meets calls. There's the raising a hand feature, the chat feature. You can share screens and whiteboards. Now breakout rooms for Teams coming this week. For asynchronous instruction, Microsoft has Stream, which is their video storage and warehousing area where you can share materials. Sway, I think, is awesome. I kind of make Sway into like a hyperdoc for lessons. So if you're around tomorrow at noon, shameless plug, I'm talking about Sway tomorrow and using Sway for newsletters and lessons and training for professional learning. So join me then if you want to. And then the class notebooks tab, if you have OneNote, you can assign assignments, Provide lesson materials with feedback sections and things like that. And of course, lesson delivery. One thing I want to just mention here as I'm quickly going through these slides, remember what we know about brain research, especially with the younger kiddos. They do not have the attention span for a 10 or 15-minute lecture. So every 10 minutes or so, even in a live lesson, engage them in something. Have them put their thoughts in a chat, do a collaboration board, have them get up and do 10 jumping jacks, whatever it is, but they need to have something that they're actively engaged in at least every 10 minutes. When you're doing asynchronous and you're thinking about lessons, think mini lessons, because really the research is pointing to 6 minutes or less for your video lessons. So really chunking those lessons into small pieces for students, especially the younger ones, but even older high school students, should be shorter with speed bumps in there, forms questions or something for them to do. And then remember to use all your different modalities. Don't just do video, video, video. Use audio, use text, have a variety of things to meet and improve everyone's understanding. So engagement and interactivity, I think this is one that we've thought about a lot, especially people in the roles of those who typically attend VSTE, but thinking about voice and choice, your process and practice using authentic hands-on activities to solve real-world problems. We have an opportunity now, as we're reimagining this hybrid learning environment, to reimagine how we engage, assess, and work in our classes. So instead of trying to just get that worksheet to be digital, let's think about if that's the best way to engage our students. And should we, instead of recreating that worksheet, should we recreate the task and what we're asking our students to do? Can we make things more discussion and debate related? Can we give choices of how they turn something in? So all of those things are important. And of course, some tools that you can use from Microsoft. You can add tabs to your team to encourage student participation at the top of your team. You can add links to any website, literally any website. You can poll students using Microsoft Forms, and Polly is an app that you can add to your team. And then remember to do group work. I know it's uncomfortable. We'll hopefully run that way in second semester, but utilize breakout rooms, the collaboration space in OneNote. Have areas that are safe for students to work together and where they can work together, even if part of their group is in the classroom and part of the group is at home. So thinking about how we can facilitate that and put the procedures in place for them to do that. Should you start with like your unit end project as your first group, group activity in their first breakout room? And no, probably not. Start smaller, have them learn how to interact in that way, and then move to those larger type assignments. Assessment and feedback, we know formative assessment throughout the unit. It doesn't have to be graded, but the students rely on that feedback to improve so that by the summative assessment at the end of the unit, they can show you their mastery of their content. Usually these are graded and considered final, but I know that I let my students take multiple attempts at my summative assessments. But also think about if they have to be your regular type tests. So for formative assessments, it doesn't have to be a form. It could be, but it could also just be a summary of understanding in OneNote. It could be a poll. You could have your exit tickets still like you would have in your normal classroom. And your summative assessments can be things like your essays and objective tests and things that you've always done in the way you've always done them. That's fine. That still is fine. But you can also have them utilize video and do demonstrations, create a portfolio instead, maybe have a project-based or problem-based task. Using Minecraft. I've had some teachers who are continuing to use Minecraft this year and having students create worlds or cells. We've had some biology teachers have their students create cells. Our sign language teachers at our high schools are having their students build a house in Minecraft and then video themselves doing a tour and signing what they built and why they put it there. So lots of different ways that students can show understanding that's not a traditional essay and test. I've had so many teachers say, Kristen, students are cheating on my tests. How can I stop them from cheating? Well, they're at home. I don't know how you're going to stop them from cheating unless you do something that they can't cheat on. Ask them to do other things. Ask them to create, to justify, to debate, to discuss, do those other things that they can't just Google the answer for. When you're talking about those bigger summative assessments. So last, just a couple of tools for Microsoft tools for assessment. I think these are, a lot of them have been used in the traditional classroom last year. So again, the Insights tab is listed here. We talked about that before. Microsoft Forms is great for exit tickets, entry tickets, regular quizzes and tests, surveys and polls. They don't have to be graded for a form. Collecting assignments in your Assignments tab in your Teams and your OneNote class notebook. And then you can also, of course, communicate feedback in Teams and in OneNote as well.
Kristen, I'm afraid we're going to have to
We are
wrap
good.
things up.
This is the end of it. So
Okay.
there's one more slide, and this is presentation you can download. So just has like a summary of the tools that I touched on throughout the talk. So thank you. Sorry, I went over.
Oh, no, that's, like I said, we've got some leeway on these days. And thank you very much. That was an awful lot of good information squeezed into a little time. And we appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your time out in the evening.